It was strange to think that people could still be interested in figures from so long ago, but one detail always piqued people's interest. What if the ancient destruction described in holy texts hadn't killed all living things? This thought became even more interesting when references in old texts hinted at options that went against what was usually thought. It's possible that something bigger was hiding behind these old stories, something that made the idea of total destruction seem impossible. But there were still two questions. Could colossal creatures really get away from a disaster that was going to destroy everything? And if that's the case, what makes it possible for such an unusual feat to happen? Answers given in old texts say that, according to unofficial stories, huge beings would have used routes that normal people couldn't get to and gotten spiritual help from fallen beings, which would have ensured their survival in a new world. From that point on, the theme grew beyond what was thought possible. Ancient records, based on different stories, said that these beings called Nephilim lived through a dark time before the world was rebuilt. These stories say that while storms, floods, and the end of whole societies happened on the surface, huge beings looked for safety in deep places, secret caves, and underground areas that, according to some stories, were made to keep pieces of a forbidden past safe. Some writings say that these creatures didn't just rely on their strength, but also on the knowledge they got from spiritual beings known as Watchers. Some old books say that these Watchers were not from the human world, even though they freely meddled in the lives of those huge beings. People blamed these beings, which were described as angels who turned their backs on their own order, for the presence of the Nephilim. The same writings say that they stayed close to their children even after they fell. This meant that, even though they couldn't do anything right away after being punished, they would have left directions and occult skills that could have helped people stay alive and keep a family going that seemed like it was going to die out. Other historical writings say that after the big accident, many of these giants not only got away, but also showed up again in remote areas. Some stories say that they went into hilly areas, faraway deserts, and deep caves, and formed small groups that kept traits they got from their ancestors in heaven. They would be more stealthy versions, but they would still be aggressive and eat too much, according to stories from later generations who said they saw remains of these animals. Records of fights with giants in different parts of the world support the idea that societies that rebuilt after the destruction would have met beings as damaging as these. People from the past told stories about great fighters who fought huge enemies. They gave these battles a strange beginning that many people thought had something to do with stories from before humanity was born again. These meetings showed that this family was still alive, despite what was thought before. According to the reports, the Nephilim are still doing bad things, like wasting resources without thinking, attacking communities that are weak, and even doing extreme things that are seen as going against the natural order. Even though these stories are told orally and are known to be exaggerated, they all have one thing in common: fear. As people rebuilt their lives after the global disaster, they brought with them images of what they thought were creatures that shouldn't be there, but kept on staying. But what really interested old researchers was how these beings were connected to their dead parents and what that meant for people. The link between the messed up heavens and the weak earth caused deep thoughts about limits being crossed, duties being ignored, and effects that went beyond the mortal realm. The texts say that when these beings mated with human women, they made animals that should have never been on the surface, but were. Their actions changed the way people think about submission and spiritual rebellion forever. Stories told over hundreds of years to warn people about this difficult partnership. People in the past tried to figure out how a forbidden mix of heavenly and mortal rules could cause so much damage. In later teachings, this was seen as a picture of the chaos that happens when the divine's rules are broken. Apocryphal works, on the other hand, say that there were more complicated layers to this story. They say that even after the fall, Some watchers still tried to change human history through their giant offspring. From these stories, a mosaic of ideas about forbidden power, secret knowledge, and actions that changed the history of the first peoples in a big way after the great disaster came together. The fact that these beings are still mentioned in other stories shows that for many, the end described in the official books did not mean the end of their lives completely. Instead, it was just a change of setting for things that were supposed to go away, but found ways to stay. It's clear that these stories aren't just about monsters from the past. They're also about deep moral issues like duty, spiritual effects, and responsibility. Each text that has been kept alive, whether it's a tale or a symbol, shows how people have tried to figure out how different worlds interact with each other. This is a quest that goes back thousands of years and still makes people think about what was hidden after the big event that changed the world. Before we go on, please like this story and subscribe to our station here if you like it. We bring you material that shows you interesting and forgotten parts of the Bible, and the trip is just getting started. In the comments, write, "I want to know how the biblical giants did what they did." That way I'll know you're with us as we look for answers that go beyond time. Also, please leave a super thanks if you want to help this work. We can keep telling more Bible stories and spreading this message of faith and hope thanks to your gift. Thank you so much for your help. We'll keep going on our journey today. The damage from the flood seemed to end a dark part of human history, but stories that have been lost to time show that evil was not totally wiped out. Even though the water had cleaned the earth, it still shook with the vibrations of forces that had not been judged. Giant children of the guardians who were shaped by illegal unions still lived in remote areas, carrying the weight of their ancestors' disobedience, and where they left marks on the ground, order fell apart again. The sounds of people crying out again, the cries of families whose lives were ruined by these hungry presences rose to the heavens, where plans were being made for a new movement. The Creator, whose original plan had gone wrong, told beings of light what to do, and they never changed their minds. They were messengers from long ago, and they were known for being loyal and strong beyond any power on earth. They wouldn't go down to talking. They were going to use force to restore order. Michael stood out from the rest of them. He was sent by clear authority to face Sunyasa, the person who used to lead the guards who had died. The being in question had been sent to protect people, but instead he caused his friends to fail. His fault was not only rebellion, but also the corruption of generations and giving up God's plan for the world in return for power over people. Michael and Sunyasa's meeting was not only a battle of wills, but also a showdown between sticking to your guns and betraying everyone you trust. Raphael had to deal with a threat that was less obvious but just as dangerous, while Michael fought on the level of power. Azazel was another one of the tainted guards who wanted power and had told men things that they should have never known. He brought guns, war plans, temptations, and false things with him. Children of Adam had never been violent before, but it spread through the groups like a curse. Raphael's job was clear. He had to shut down the source of this bad training. At the time of the fight between Raphael and Azazel, the land was already marked with sin. People who had hidden in the woods during the flood were used as the setting for a new trial. Records from long ago say that Raphael did not pause. When he had chains made by God's order, he put Azazel in them and threw him into a deep pit where he would stay alone until the time was right. His name, on the other hand, would never go away because it was a warning against abusing information. At the same time, another figure from the holy story came back, Noah. The person who had been picked to protect people during the wet decision now had to deal with even more shocking news. Uriel, a cherub whose job it was to teach and warn, came to see him. Not only did Uriel bring dreams, he also told people what would happen. He told Noah that some human lines were still spiritually contaminated and that they would need to be on high alert all the time. Uriel also told them about other giants who had gotten away from the cleaning process and were now roaming the world, hiding in hard-to-reach places. Even though their acts were smaller, they still caused trouble. Noah was told to keep his family tree clean because it was from that bloodline that the promise of salvation would come. This discovery not only made Noah responsible, but it also made him aware that evil had not been completely destroyed, just contained. The works talk about how the Nephilim felt when their parents were defeated. Some stories say that the giants went crazy when they saw their makers killed or locked up. Many people turned to violence because they didn't know what to do, which made things worse for the towns that were still standing. Some symbolic stories say that others went even deeper to find safety, digging caves and fleeing into mountains or oceans to wait for a time they thought would come back. For thousands of years, people felt the effects of what the gods and their children and grandchildren did. Tribes told stories about these events over the years, and scribes wrote them down on tablets, but they were never included in the official collections. Even though these texts were formally rejected, they kept alive a different view of the conflict between spiritual revolt and submission to heaven. A war not only of swords, but also of power, information, and who you are. This war didn't end with charges or a few small wins. It was passed down through generations, occult rituals, and hidden knowledge. Many people saw the remnant giants as both scary and holy beings. Ancient cultures worshipped some of them as gods, mixing up their bad beginnings with real holiness. This worship of idols, which came from not knowing where they came from, totally messed up the minds of whole groups of people. So, the story didn't end with the flood or the punishments in heaven. It got around. Stories that have been passed down from one family to the next in carved stone signs and pieces of texts that have stood the test of time. And it always came with the same warning. Mixing heaven and earth against God's will has effects that will last forever and be hard to understand. Uriel's warning to Noah wasn't just a way to stay alive. It was also a holy call. He and his family would be the link between the bad past and the good future. A new world would be made. The ark wasn't just a way to protect people from the water. It was also a sign of keeping things pure and a source of hope in a world that was falling apart. Noah's faith in what God showed him made him act carefully, leading his family to the completion of a bigger plan. At the same time, Gabriel was given a clear task. His job, unlike the other archangels, wasn't to fight a single fallen angel. Instead, it was to get into the gathering of Nephilim in the area called Diedmar, which was the source of all live evil. People thought that spot was the center of the revolt, where the giant's offspring lived in pride and didn't care about God's rules at all. Heaven, on the other hand, chose a more strategic approach. Not instant force, but separation within the group. Gabriel, who was in charge in heaven, changed the leaders of the giants' minds. He stirred up questions, mistrust, and anger that were already there but had been dormant. He did this without using guns. Old grudges came to the surface, weak partnerships fell apart, and each clan's swollen pride made it impossible to make peace. A whisper turned into a roar. Very quickly during the war, Diedmar turned into a field of death. Brothers stopped getting along. Nephilim used to rule as a single unit, but now they started killing each other in bloody battles because they wanted power and needed to get even. Gabriel watched, but not with pleasure. He watched with the firmness of someone who is doing what is right. This was the only way to lessen their presence on Earth without interfering directly, which would upset the balance of the plane below. There was no fight when the water finally started to rise. Those who made it through the fights were either weak, hurt, or hopelessly lost. At this point, the water sealed everything for good. Heaven had done something, and the earth would be made clean. The sealed and guarded ark continued to float as a sign that a new age had begun. The fields that the giants used to live on were submerged by the harsh seas. It wasn't just justice that was being done there, it was also kindness. The end of the old world was not only a punishment, but also a chance for people to start over. Noah's carefully chosen bloodline was the way for life to start to grow again, without the immediate threat of heavenly corruption. The promise that total ruin would not happen again would be sealed in the bond that God would make with the survivors. It would be a new start. The bodily death of the Nephilim did not end everything, though. The Book of Enoch and other old manuscripts contain revelations that say the souls of these animals did not die. Without their huge bodies, but still connected to the world, they roamed the earth as spooky beings that went by many names, including devils. Because they couldn't meet their normal needs, their hunger and thirst never went away. This made them even more angry at the people who lived in the world they had lost. These wandering souls, filled with sadness and pain, turned against the people who came after them. Even though they couldn't be seen, their actions left behind deaths that couldn't be explained, violent acts that made no sense, and moral decay that didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. Messages from long ago say that all of this was evidence that these spiritual people were still around, even though they had been physically destroyed. It became even more tragic that the Nephilim were alive. In life, their huge bodies went against what God told them to do. Now that they were spiritual, they continued to cause chaos, but not with force, but with their power. They still had the urge to hurt people, but now they did it to men's minds and hearts. They were ghosts from the past that kept on touching the present and trying to repeat the cycle of ruin that had made them who they were. This new reality made people more alert. The surviving, who were led by Noah and his children and grandchildren, were told to look for signs of these beings. Religion would be a decision in this new world, but faith would also be a tool against forces that can't be seen. Being obedient to God, being humble, and being smart protected people from these restless spirits' attacks. The Nephilim still carried the weight of their past lives with them even when they were not physical. When the bond between heaven and earth was broken, it left scars that would last for generations. The things they did and the way they affected people spiritually served as a live warning. The fact that their angelic parents didn't follow the rules affected not only the skies but also the world, even after the judgment. So the start of a new era for humans would not be easy. It was important to rebuild not only societies and towns, but also spirituality. People told each other stories about giants, guards who died, and wars that were long forgotten. These stories weren't just tales, they were important reminders of a time that could never happen again. Even though the world was safe, there was still a lot to keep safe. The Nephilim souls were still haunted by the things they did, even though they no longer had bodies. Their damage did not end when their huge bodies fell apart. It started when they were alive and walked the earth. Instead, their impact grew stronger, becoming invisible and hard to spot. They were no longer heavy on the ground. Instead, they hung over people's minds like thick shadows, stirring up fears, violent urges, and tragedies that no one could explain. It wasn't the end when the species went extinct. It was the start of a time of mental fear. A lot of old people saw this new phase as part of a long judgment. People made illegal deals, worshipped evil spirits, and used banned knowledge before the flood. These actions were written down, and according to these stories, God let the giant souls live on as a form of ongoing punishment. Not to punish men forever, but to constantly show them what will happen if they don't change. It was a judgment that people would remember. Based on old writings, this moral pollution started not only with the lost angels, but also with how people responded to power opportunities. Some women were taken against their will, while others were drawn in by the glow of the stars. These meetings led to the creation of the Nephilim, who were both scary monsters and symbols of people's desire to rise without having to obey. The terrible consequences of these decisions have been felt for thousands of years, leaving psychic marks that can't be seen, but are very deep. Even though they were just moving shadows, the Nephilim were a mix of the holy and the vulgar. the natural and the supernatural. Even in their spectral form, their presence threw the natural world out of balance. The constant hunger that drove them wasn't for food or water anymore, it was for power and chaos. This hidden but felt presence always seemed to be a threat to peace between men. As if the past was still alive and well, it brought about disease outbreaks, pointless wars, and damaging urges that no one could explain. The Enochian culture has a special way of looking at this link. It said that the Nephilim could still be seen in dreams and fancies as ghosts, and this link wasn't just a memory. It was a spiritual one that kept them important even though they weren't there. In the Book of Giants, for example, it's not just about how angels fell or how God punished them. It's also about how their presence affected the rest of creation on a spiritual and psychological level. The Nephilim often saw scenes of damage, ruin, and being alone in their dreams. People who still had signs of awareness felt guilty and were afraid of being judged forever. One of these beings, Maui, stood out as a strange figure among the psychic survivors. While others stayed angry and proud, Maui started to have bad dreams that made him feel like he should feel bad about what he had done. Maui had very bad dreams that were very real. He saw fire, people running away, rivers drying up, and stars falling. But what bothered him the most was the figure of a man dressed in light who stood there and watched him. The images got so scary that Maui's spirit, which didn't have a body, chose to try to figure them out. Ancient stories say that this trip led him to Enoch. Few people had a link to the skies like Enoch did. He was also known for being wise. He had been set apart from the earth to live in the high realms and walked with God before the flood. Maui knew this man could see things other people couldn't when he found him, not with his eyes, but with his mind. Enoch knew how to interpret dreams, tell the difference between signs and lies, and show what lay hidden between planes. It didn't surprise Enoch when he heard Maui's stories. In peace, he confirmed that dreams were not just made up by people who were scared. They were signs that a circle was about to end. He told Maui that the gods had let him see what was going to happen so that he could understand that no being, no matter how strong, would be able to avoid the end of time. Even the roaming souls would be called back to the world, where they would no longer have any effect on it. Maui was scared when they found out about this. He felt the weight of what he had done for the first time. His acts, which seemed like signs of power at the time, were now bitter reminders of the damage he had caused that could not be fixed. He knew that God's justice went beyond time and reached things that didn't have bodies, even though he was a spirit. Noah's children and grandchildren started to tell Maui's story as a warning. The elders said that the revealing light of Enoch made even the souls of the giants, who were once very proud, shudder. These stories made the younger generations feel responsible because they saw the mistakes of the past as lessons for the present. The disaster of the Nephilim wasn't just a story about monsters, it also showed what people do when they don't follow the truth. So even though their bodies were stuck in time and their words had turned into whispers, the Nephilim's power continued to show what happens when the holy is broken. Men were informed by their wandering souls that God's judgment never sleeps, even though mercy is always close at hand. The dreams that Enoch had were not sweet metaphors or comforting symbols. It was a harsh warning about the scars that the giants' destruction had left behind. They showed regions that were ruined and whole towns that were swallowed up by blood, fire, or raging water. The pictures were so clear that even the Nephilim souls were shaking. It was clear what Enoch said. Redemption was possible, but it would never be simple. It wasn't enough to just say they were sorry. They had to reject evil totally and cut all ties with the violence, pride, and vanity that shaped their lives. He told the story of how God saw these beings' empty attempts to say sorry and chose to step in with force that could not be undone. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment choice for the waters to destroy the world. It was planned to break the circle of the Nephilim's control over it. The flood, which was seen as a sign of complete cleaning, hit everyone, even those who tried to run away. There was a second wave of judgment for those who got away from the flood. Angels of death were sent to find people hiding in caves, on faraway islands, or in empty places. It wasn't safe anywhere. But in some accounts of this story, the most shocking turn came when the Leviathan was sent on what the ancient Manichaean texts called the last divine hunt. In other texts, this huge monster is seen as a sign of uncontrolled chaos. It was set free with one goal: to find and kill the giant clan's members. Record pieces show that Leviathan was more than just a monster. Holy wrath came alive in that thing. The ground shook when it walked. The seas split or churned with such force where it went that they swallowed coastal towns. Its roar cut through the mountains, and just being there was a sentence. The last few Nephilim, who were once feared by whole countries, ran away in fear from this force that couldn't be stopped or fought. It was the act of judging itself. Even though different sources don't all say the same thing, these accounts all point to the same thing. God made sure that the giant's impact would not last in any way. It was inevitable that both their physical buildings and their mental memories would be lost. It was a planned ending that was carried out with perfect accuracy. There is nothing that can live without the mark of the bond with the Creator. The book of Genesis says that the Nephilim lived on earth in those days and also afterward, which shows that this view is partly true. This mysterious phrase can be understood in a number of different ways. Some researchers think it means that some relatives will still be alive after the flood. Others, though, think it means repeating the pattern of defiance, as if the spirit of revolt had lived on through ideas, wants, and tendencies that were passed on. No matter what meaning you choose, the Nephilim are seen as a turning point, a line between a world made to reflect heavenly order and one that is messed up by pride, illegal mixing, and dominance. In old mythology, these beings were not only huge in size, but also huge in terms of evil, skewed knowledge, and uncontrolled hunger. The book of Enoch tells us that the Nephilim came into being when guardian angels from heaven married human women. Even though it's not as clear in Genesis, it says that sons of God married daughters of men and had ancient heroes, men of renown. This phrase is kind of vague. Are these heroes honored for great acts or for wreaking havoc like never before? In these works, there isn't much difference between fame and shame. The differences between the Bible and legendary stories don't take away from what they have in common. Instead, they make them more symbolic and theologically rich. The standard version of the Bible says that all living things outside the ark died. The water reached more than 15 cubits above any known height and covered even the tallest mountains. Nothing was left unclean. This exact account backs up the idea that God didn't leave any gaps for evil to stay in the body. But writings that aren't in the canon show a different point of view. Judging goes beyond the physical and into the spiritual realm. They say that even the ghosts of giants were punished, challenged, and tormented. In this reading, Leviathan would not only kill bodies, but also look for presences to hunt. A storm of justice that goes through all worlds and wipes out everything that refuses to follow God's plan. These different versions living together make an amazing mosaic. Each piece shows a different side of the same conflict, between the human who wants to be like God and the divine who wants to keep his creation from destroying itself, between the fairness that corrects and the kindness that starts over. Furthermore, in this situation, the Nephilim will always be a reminder of what will happen when resistance and power work together. So the story isn't just about monsters from the past. It's about how much God can tolerate, how fragile human choices are, and how heaven is always trying to make things right. The writings are different in many ways, but they all agree on one thing. The Creator steps in when creation is in danger of losing its own purity. He always does things with a bigger goal in mind, not just to punish, but to teach. The flood came down on earth with great force. Birds, wild animals, creepy crawlies, and even people were sucked into the rising water by a force that didn't spare any life outside the ark. The holy story makes it clear. Everything that breathed was killed. Only Noah, his family, and the beings that were safe with him were saved. People thought that act of divine cleansing put an end to the rot that had taken over the world. But in later stories, the name of the Nephilim kept coming up, like a force that wouldn't go away. This surprise return happened many years later, at a very important time in the history of the Hebrew people. As Moses led the Israelites toward the Promised Land, one of the first things he did was send 12 men to check out the land. The goal was strategic: to find out how strong the people were, how good the land was, and how safe the towns were. They were supposed to come back with reports on how things went, but what they brought back was better than anyone had hoped or feared. The spies told the king that Canaan was indeed full, a land that is rich in crops and full of milk and honey. But what really interested them was the appearance of huge people who lived in protected cities. The most frightening sight was of the Nephilim's children and grandchildren, who were very tall and strong. What the spies said was that the Anak children who lived in the area were so big that they made them feel like grasshoppers. In those men's words, an old fear seemed to come back to life. It's not clear if the Nephilim were completely wiped out because they were mentioned directly so long after the flood. How could their children still live on Earth if the water had wiped them out? The spies' account didn't leave any room for metaphor. They were there and saw it for themselves. What they saw changed them deeply. It became more than possible that the Nephilim had somehow avoided being judged by everyone. It became a scary possibility. There were still people alive after the cleaning act, which showed that there were still flaws, cracks, and tracks that the destruction did not reach. Some old scholars thought that the Nephilim hid in deep caves or other places that were hard to get to while they waited for the water to pass. Others say that some bad families kept going in secret, mixing with weaker groups of people until they were strong enough to show themselves again. In any case, when they came back to Canaan, it was a mental and physical struggle. The Israelites were already weak from their trip through the desert, and the thought of meeting the same monsters that had once made God angry made them panic. The camp was filled with doubt. They wanted to go back to Egypt because they liked being slaves there better than fighting giants. The memory of the damage these creatures had done was still living. Their stories about the Nephilim had been told for generations, so they were afraid of them, even though they had never lived with them. More than just being strong, the Nephilim stood for chaos, revolt, and the forbidden union of the divine and the human. Seeing their children and grandchildren again was like seeing a curse come back to life. And the obvious question came up: had the judgment really been over if they were still alive? The fact that the Nephilim kept coming back raised questions about the idea of a final judgment. This proved that evil can live on even after the harshest punishments, hidden and dormant, but never totally gone. Realizing this needed more than just military training. It called for mental watchfulness. The fight wasn't just over land or region, it was also about being pure and following God's plan. Some thinkers see this event as proof of how complicated God's plans are. God's goal was clear: to make the earth clean. It turned out, though, that evil could come back even when help came directly from heaven. This perceived inconsistency, on the other hand, shows something deeper: the freedom of people. The Creator doesn't get rid of evil by force. Instead, he or she lets people face it, reject it, and beat it. Having the Nephilim in Canaan wasn't just a reminder of the past, it was also a new test. This is what you would expect to happen, as shown by Joshua and Caleb's bravery in not being afraid of the giants. They knew how strong their enemies were, but they believed that the same God who had once controlled the waves would also lead them now. The Nephilim were not impossible for them. The Most High's devotion made them seem like small problems. Another important event in the history of the Hebrew people. When faced with the impossible, it showed how weak faith can be. but it also showed that success didn't rest on numbers, strength, or size, but on trust in a promise. When the offspring of the Nephilim show up after the flood, it breaks the idea of complete destruction and makes us think about how corruption can happen over and over again. It proves that evil can come back with a new look, even after being hurt. A big flood isn't enough to get rid of it. You need to keep being wise, have new courage, and be true all the time. The fact that the Nephilim stayed after the flood became a mystery that has captivated generations. It wasn't just an interesting piece of history. It was a live representation of the boundaries of God's power, the power of good over evil, and the effects of making alliances that aren't allowed. Their stories kept coming up, even after the big purification, which led to questions, worries, and guesses. These being stories reaffirmed the idea that decisions may end chapters, but they don't always end the spiritual processes that started them. They were like a shadow that never goes away. People called these giants survivors in the midst of destruction, and they came to stand for more than just power. They showed how heaven and earth are always at odds with each other spiritually. The thought of the Nephilim never went away fully. Instead, it kept coming back at key times to tell people that chaos can start again when people aren't paying attention. When their heirs showed up in Canaan, it shocked Moses' spies and brought up old wounds in the heart of the story. Some old writings and ideas, backed up by stories, say that these new Nephilim were not exactly the same as the last generation. They might have happened because of making the same mistakes over and over again. Gods would have told a new group of heavenly beings to ignore what happened to their ancestors and start a new family of giants by mating with human women. This idea explains why the sons of Anak were there without going against the story of the flood judgment as an event that wiped out everything. According to writings from the past, the first lost angels, called Watchers, were locked up in a spiritual jail under the desert called Dudael. There they are still chained up while they wait for their final punishment for breaking God's rules. Some scholars don't rule out the possibility that there were other angels who didn't directly take part in the first act of revolt, but eventually went down the same path. This would explain the later appearance of a new generation of Nephilim without having to use the idea that the ancients lived on physically. These new fallen angels seem to have given in to the same desire, even though they knew what would happen to the first Watchers if they did. The trend of breaking the rules kept happening. The desire to do what was banned and to test the limits between the divine and the human showed that disobedience wasn't just one act at a time, but a constant urge. This repetition didn't lessen God's power. Instead, it made the call to obey and be spiritually alert even more important. Still, there is a different way to look at things that comes from the holy books themselves. Scholars have always had different ideas about what Genesis 6:4 means when it talks about sons of God. If these sons were not heavenly beings but rather representatives of different human lineages, for example, the pious lineage of descendants of Seth, then the union with the daughters of men, who are connected to the lineage of Cain, would show a moral breakdown on the inside without angels being involved. From this point of view, the Nephilim are not mixtures between the holy and the earthly, but the result of bad relationships between humans. This reading doesn't downplay how bad sin is. Instead, it moves the attention from a violation of God's rules to the destruction of society. Men becoming vicious, strong, and cruel would happen because people have strayed from the standards set by the Creator. The Nephilim would not be strong because they were descended from angels in this case. Instead, they would be strong because they were men with unrestrained pride who wanted to rule over all other men. But this view has some problems when compared to older stories and the specific fear that the spies sent to Canaan talked about. If they were fighting normal human fighters, the comparison to locusts and the uncontrollable fear would not be so strong. They made an impact that points to something older and deeper, like they were facing a ghost from the past that had never been totally shut up. So, it's possible for both meanings to exist at the same time. That there were times in history when angels went beyond their duty, and times when human corruption got so bad that it led to men who followed the same damaging pattern as the Nephilim. The real problem might not have been where the giants came from, but how the spirit of resistance that made them happen kept happening. Whatever the reason, the Nephilim were always a danger sign, whether they came back through life, repetition, or decay. Their position in Canaan wasn't just a problem for the army. It was a test of faith, something that made me want to trust God. When the Hebrews saw these things, they had to choose between giving in to their fear or believing what the Bible said. The Bible says that while most people hid, Joshua and Caleb kept their eyes open. They knew that success didn't rest on giants not being there, but on God being there. The real fight was never just against people, it was always against what the Nephilim stood for. The breaking down of holy bounds, the pride that comes before the fall, and the urge to ignore set limits. So the story of the Nephilim doesn't end with the flood. It keeps going as a reflection of how weak people are and how dangerous it is to break spiritual rules. This shows that the end of an age does not always mean the end of the mistakes that came with it, and that the fight for loyalty is still going on between heaven and earth. It is both brave and scary to think that the curse on Canaan could have led to the appearance of the Nephilim later on. It would not only be a spiritual memory of revolt between heaven and earth, it would also be a direct genetic result of bad relationships between people. One of the most important people in this story is Canaan, the son of Ham, who was cursed by Noah after an act of shame and dishonor. His children and grandchildren would be linked to events that brought back the chaos of the past. In this way of thinking, the sons of Shem and Japheth getting married to women from Canaan could have started the circle of mixing that was banned. If God's people hadn't been so careless about keeping themselves spiritually pure, their children would have been harmed even without the help of fallen angels. In this case, the giants would not be actual resurrected bodies. Instead, they would be new examples of the same pattern of sin, big bodies born from small but spiritually important choices. Not everyone agrees with this view, but it has a lot of symbolic weight. It ties together what seemed to be a single curse with the return of an event that was supposed to have ended. In a roundabout way, it shows that people are to blame for keeping harmful processes going. If the Nephilim came back, it wasn't because God let them. It was because people kept making agreements that He had already said were wrong. Throughout its pages, the Bible warns many times that the chosen people should be kept separate from nearby nations. Not only for cultural reasons, but also because mixing religions could open up doors that heaven had shut. This danger was shown by Canaan, which had dirty towns and a history of worshipping false gods. People were drawn to its traditions and ties, which was both alluring and deadly. The Israelites often let themselves get carried away, even though they were given clear directions. It wasn't just soldiers who took over the Promised Land. It was also people of faith. A lot of fights were lost in this field that no one could see. Being close to cursed people brought up old habits, fed vanity, and made submission less solid. It may seem crazy to think that these relationships could have led to the birth of a new generation of Nephilim, but it is a strong spiritual warning. Even though it can't be proven for sure that the giants came back through these unions, the fact that it was possible made people think twice about what they were going to do. Many people didn't turn away from what God had rejected. Instead, they chose to go down sneaky paths that put their inheritance and mission at risk. There is still a tension between divine authority and human duty. At times, it looked like the appearance of beings that reminded people of the ancient Nephilim's fear was more of a result of human activities than of approval from heaven. Men seem to have made it easier for evil to come back in new forms by ignoring the rules that were already in place. At the same time, fear may have made people see Canaan's descendants even more as huge figures. In Numbers 13, the story of the spies shows both a physical and an emotional picture of the people involved. When the men Moses sent saw fortified towns and strong troops, they felt small. People may have made the connection to locusts out of fear rather than truth. When people are worried, their imaginations run wild, and ghosts from the past often show up in new forms. Because of this, it's possible that the return of the Nephilim was a mix-up of memory, pain, and reality. The Bible story carefully records the spies' story, but it doesn't fully back it up. In fact, only Joshua and Caleb stayed strong, not giving in to fear but believing that God had a plan. This makes it seem like the fear that the supposed giants caused was more mental than physical. Even so, the fact that the stories name the children of Anak, who are connected to the Nephilim, makes the sign even stronger. The trend was the same. As people turned away from God, they got closer to things they didn't understand. The threat wasn't exactly the same as it was in Noah's time, and the outcome was almost always terrible. So, it's possible that the curse on Canaan was more than just a sentence. It could have been a divine sign that if that bloodline wasn't saved, the mistake would be passed down. As the Israelites settled in the land, they had to live close to these dangerous places. In the end, the story of the Nephilim is still a source of discussion and a reflection. It shows how much people can bring back things that should be dead. It shows that people who have been given spiritual revelations but still flirt with the forbidden keep making the same mistakes that fallen angels did. The Nephilim story isn't just about big people. It's about not wanting to follow the rules, the drive to cross them, and how important it is to stay true. It will always serve as a warning that some destruction leaves behind effects, and that the line between the holy and the profane will always be thin. In Bible stories, the name Anak has meanings that go beyond family trees. It makes me think of a people who were thought to be very strong and powerful. Their children and grandchildren, the Anakim, were called giants, both in size and character. These beings lived in Canaan and became a sign of what was left of the evil that existed before the flood, or maybe of a new kind of wrongdoing that had come back to life. Not only did their appearance test the Israelite forces, but it also tested religious ideas about how the flood had already completed the judgment. The book of Joshua tells of several war battles that were fought against the strong people who lived in the promised land. The Anakim stand out from the rest. Even though the Hebrews won, the Bible still says that not everyone was killed. Some people made it out alive and stayed in places like Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. This small but important fact, which is often missed, shows that complete elimination was not possible. These descendants have been around for a long time, which suggests a link to the old Nephilim, or at least a new look at their dangers. Scholars have very strong disagreements about what this consistency means. Were the Anakim just big men who were based on the fear of Israelite spies and warriors, or were they really copies or remains of a mixed lineage that came about when heaven and earth broke the rules again? This lack of clarity adds to the difficulty of the text and shows that the story of the giants is more than just a physical event. It is a religious, moral, and spiritual issue. The Israelites' path as they tried to take over Canaan is marked by these mixed feelings. Their foes were not just troops of people. They were live examples of all the things God had said were wrong. They were dealing with people who were both a physical threat and a moral threat. God's order was clear: don't mix, don't kill anything, and don't make the same mistakes again. But the Anakim put this loyalty to the test. It was a call to face our fears and the memory of the great fall. The Bible talks about the connection between the Anakim and the Nephilim, but it does so in a careful way. This link is suggested by the spies' accounts, especially in the book of Numbers. When they talk about the sons of Anak, they directly talk about the Nephilim. The Bible doesn't say for sure that these people are the same giants from Noah's time, but it's clear that they are connected in a symbolic way. It's like the story was trying to say that things that were judged once can come up again if people aren't careful. When these huge beings showed up again after the flood, It showed a trend that kept happening. Threats like the ones from the past keep showing up, whether it's because of tainted bloodlines, unapproved spiritual relationships, or actions of defiance by the chosen people. This shows that restoring order completely takes more than just destruction. It takes ongoing commitment. This is something that the Anakim remind us of. Their exact history is still a secret, but their role in the story is clear, to show what happens when you make bad decisions. Their strong towns, strong armies, and control of large parts of the land show that they were not only against the Israelites' progress, but also against God's plan. Some of them stayed even after big campaigns to get rid of them, which shows that partial obedience is not enough to promise full blessing. The Anakim were a threat in more ways than one. They held the potential for another fall, another banned union, and another tragic recurrence. So, the order to get rid of all of their power wasn't exaggerated. It was a matter of necessity. History has shown what happens when the lines between the holy and the common are crossed, and Canaan was once again the place where these lines would be put to the test. This worry is made worse by the thought that the Anakim might be the result of new unions between angels and humans. There was nothing that stopped other lost angels from making the same mistakes after the first watchers were locked up. Rebellion's heart is always there, and it finds a way to act whenever there are spiritual holes. Also, the Anakim would be the actual children of giants from the past and the embodiments of a spirit of defiance that goes back many generations. On the other hand, it's possible that the Israelites' bad memories of the Nephilim changed how they saw things. During times of doubt, strong enemies are seen more clearly. Fear makes things worse. Worry twists things, and stories get bigger than they really are. This option doesn't lessen the story, it makes it stronger, because it shows how the fear of the past can still hold us back in the present, even after we've gotten over it. The Anakim, in any case, took on a new form of an old danger. They were the link between what people did in the past and what they have to do now, and going up against them needed more than just guns. A sword wasn't enough to beat them. It was important to remember, fight back, and follow through. So the fact that the Anakim lived in Canaan not only continues the story of the giants, it makes it longer. It shows that bad things can come back in different forms, even after being punished, and that there are always fights going on behind the scenes between keeping vows and keeping the faith of the people. There are still disagreements between spiritual and physical theories about where the giants that showed up after the flood came from. Were they straight descendants of the old Nephilim who had survived by some mysterious way while the earth was being cleansed? Or were they the result of human unions that God didn't like the marriage of Israelites to Canaanite women, which broke God's rules and produced a new generation cursed? Even though there are no clear solutions, these questions come up a lot in the Bible. In the same way that the flood was a judgment meant to clean up the world, Joshua's fight against the Anakim is also a judgment. A message from heaven tells Joshua to lead a fierce attack against the giants of Canaan. There were so many wins. The Anakim were mostly wiped out, and the few that were left hid in towns farther away. This victory not only made Israel the strongest military power in the Promised Land, but it also confirmed God's spiritual rule over it. Even though they won, though, ghosts from the past continued to haunt them. The stories don't end there. Years later, during the time of David, stories of huge figures start to surface again. Men like Ishbi-Benob and his heirs show up on the battlefield and demand that the Hebrew soldiers have superhuman bravery. In addition to being records of brave actions, these episodes show how a threat that was never really gone stayed around. The battle between the giants and God's people becomes a sign of a much bigger conflict, the ongoing fight between God's order and those who want to change it. The Nephilim, Anakim, and Rephaim, the three giants, become more than just images. They stand for the bad traits, like pride in ancestry, that keep coming up from generation to generation. In every fight, there are moral and spiritual choices that must be made along with the sweat and blood. You need to do more than just read these stories to understand them. One has to think about the whole web of meanings that connects these beings' beginnings and endings. The Rephaim, on the other hand, are mentioned more than the Nephilim, but they are still mysterious giants with a scary image and unknown beginnings. Some researchers think the name comes from Raphael, which could mean a unique family tree connected to both power and the afterlife. There is also the human desire to give things that don't make sense familiar names. The scouts that Moses sent to Canaan say that the people who lived there were Nephilim, but they may have been more scared than trying to be accurate. They might have given the Canaanite soldiers a mythical look by connecting tall, strong men with famous figures from ancient times. This misunderstanding shows more about the hearts of people than it does about the enemies themselves. Still, even if these later giants weren't direct offspring of fallen angels, the stories about them and their lives carry the same problems. The desire to cross holy lines, the fact that evil always comes back in new forms, and the need to be spiritually alert all the time. Ancestral fear comes back in modern forms that require fresh faith and constant awareness. So, the story of the giants is about a lot more than just old wars. It shows a pattern. When God's people break the rules, it gives other groups a chance to take over. When groups of bad people get together, the effects don't just affect the current age. Spiritual mistakes are not easy to erase. There are also times when these signs show up as real threats, like dangerous fighters or things that go against God's will. The story doesn't end with loss, though. Joshua looked at them. David got past them. As long as the chosen people stayed true, they always won. The main point of these stories is that success is guaranteed no matter how strong the enemy is, as long as the heart is in line with God's plan. They might come back, the shadows might show up again, but light will always find a place where people follow the rules. As we come to the end of this trip through the memories and stories of the biblical giants, we are told that the past, no matter how far away or symbolic it may seem, speaks directly to the problems we face now. The huge monsters that Israel faced aren't just from another time. They're also likened to the fights we all face between faith and fear, loyalty and sin, and heaven and earth. To end this circle, you have to admit that the fight wasn't just between people, but also between natures, between what people can become when they don't follow God's rules and what they are supposed to be when they follow the Most High's instructions. It's always closer than it seems to the line between success and ruin. The giants are no longer there, but the lessons that come from their footprints are still around. They make us aware, push us, and ask us to think. When they fail, we see how dangerous we are. We see the power of those who choose to follow when they lose. They remember things that help us find our way. These stories are very old and very strong. May they stay with us not just as distant echoes, but also as live signs of knowledge. May heaven and earth continue to talk to each other. Keep in mind that people will suffer if they try to do more than what they are supposed to do. And may loyalty always win in the end. Thanks for coming along on this amazing trip through the secret parts of Bible history. If this series has moved you, please share it with someone else who loves to find out about the hidden secrets in the Bible. Also, make sure you ring the bell so you don't miss the next shows. The facts that change the way we see things are still coming. May the God who shows us what we can't see continue to lead you with knowledge and understanding. Thank you for following us to the end of this incredible story. See you in the next video. May God be with you always. Amen.